Welcome to the Get Fit Guys quick and dirty tips to slim down and shape up. My name is Ben Greenfield and I'm the Get Fit Guy. In part 1 of this series, we delved into a Runner's World article called Advice to a Young Athlete, which covered supplements, recovery, nutrition, mental training, and race prep for a young elite cyclist who had written to author Alex Hutchinson asking for performance advice. Well, after reviewing supplements and recovery in part 1 of this series, today we're going to delve into nutrition, mental training, and race or big workout prep. So let's start with nutrition. When it comes to nutrition, the first piece of advice given is to increase whatever amount of vegetables and fruits you're currently eating with as much quantity and variety as possible. While I'm certainly a fan of eating plants, I do have one issue with this section of the article, the lumping of fruits and vegetables into the same category. In fact, fruits and vegetables are two entirely different food groups. Fruit is nature's dessert, and while a great source of nutrients and fiber, can also be high in fructose sugar and other calories compared to vegetables. For example, I personally eat what probably comes close to 20 to 25 servings of vegetables each day. Yes, each day, but only about 1 serving of fruit, maximum. And this is simply because when I account for other carb sources like seeds, nuts, sweet potatoes, yams, rice, etc. in my diet, the inclusion of excess fruit just doesn't allow for me to maintain a lean body mass and stabilize blood sugar levels. In addition, a diet of around 50% carbs, 20% fat, and 30% protein is recommended in the article. While this is indeed a macronutrient ratio that falls in line with conventional sports nutrition guidelines, it's important to realize that conventional sports nutrition guidelines don't necessarily take into account the fact that athletes and individuals who have been eating a slightly higher amount of healthy fats and lower amount of carbohydrates may have actually developed glycogen or storage carbohydrate conservation and fat-burning mechanisms that allow for lower carb intake, a concept which I delve into in great detail in my article about a high-fat diet and exercise study that I participated in called Faster, and I'll link to that in the show notes over at quickanddirtytips.com. Just go to the show notes for episode number 234. Now, Alex also recommends an advanced nutrition technique called Train Low, in which the overall carb intake remains high, but certain workouts are performed with low carb stores, either by training before breakfast or by depleting carb stores with periods of low carb intake. This is actually a nutrition technique that I actually use nearly every day, and it's pretty easy to implement. I just save all my day's carbohydrate intake for the very end of the day, and up until that point, I eat almost zero carbs, and instead opt for a high amount of healthy fats and a moderate amount of protein. Then, within 2 to 3 hours after my afternoon workout, I eat anywhere from 100 to 200 grams of carbohydrates from sources like red wine, dark chocolate, sweet potato, yam, rice, etc. Now, finally, Alex cites some evidence that dehydration is a trigger that can induce increases in plasma volume, which could boost endurance performance, and that you may be able to take advantage of this by doing some of your training sessions in a slightly dehydrated state. While this may be a useful biohack, I've personally found that when doing a workout with a dry mouth or when feeling dehydrated, I personally experience a dip in motivation and ability to reach a high rating of exertion. So this would be a strategy I'd reserve primarily for easier aerobic workouts and not tough training sessions. Now on to mental training, and Alex gives 2 pieces of advice in his section on mental training. Number 1, see a sports psychologist, and number 2, avoid mental fatigue before competitions. If you're a serious competitor or an athlete with a paycheck on the line, I definitely agree with the former part about seeing a sports psychologist. When it comes to the latter, it certainly is true that replying to a boatload of emails or engaging in highly cognitively demanding work can detract from subsequent physical performance, but this is mostly something to worry about prior to a key big workout or race, and not necessarily an issue before a typical day at the gym. I think the last thing that you'd want is to avoid cognitively demanding work at your office every day just to justify your workout at the end of the day. So save the mental work for after big workouts or after races, but don't necessarily avoid it every day. Now, there are a few other tricks that you want to bear in mind when it comes to mental training and motivation, tips I expound upon in my episode on 3 Jedi mind tricks for your next workout, and I'll link to that in the show notes for episode 234 as well. Number 1, affirmation. Number 2, visualization. And number 3, breathing techniques. So check out my episode number 225 for the nitty-gritty details on these 3 techniques. And then finally, there's race prep. And Alex gives a wealth of advice in the section on race prep, whether you're preparing for a 5K or an Ironman. These are the tips that really do work, including taper, which means gradually dropping your exercise volume starting 2 weeks before your big event, with about 50% of normal volume in the last week, while maintaining intensity. Now, I certainly agree with this concept, but with the caveat that I'll often taper for just 4 to 5 days before mini races, and only do a big long taper before a very important event, like say World Championships. This is because multiple multi-week tapers before an event can actually have potential to detract from fitness. Warm-up. A hard effort prior to a short, intense race or competition can increase your VO2 max during the event. And Alex recommends, for example, a moderately hard 6-minute effort finishing 10 minutes before starting a cycling race, or 2 60-second efforts a little quicker than tempo pace prior to starting a running race. I'm completely on board with this recommendation. And I would also emphasize that for a warm-up, I've also found a great deal of benefit from both visualization and something called hyperoxygenation breathing. And I'll link to more on both of those techniques in the show notes. Next is heat training. And Alex recommends heat acclimation training, like a dry sauna, to boost performance, even in cool conditions. This can certainly be a good way to increase heat tolerance and also blood plasma volume. And I get into the science of heat acclimation in an interview that I did with Dr. Rhonda Patrick over at bengreenfeldfitness.com. But in addition to heat training, I'd also emphasize the importance of cold training and cold thermogenesis for increasing cardiovascular efficiency and also stress resilience. And for any given week, I typically do a couple of 10 to 30-minute cold water immersion sessions and 30 to 45-minute dry sauna sessions, the latter of which, incidentally, is most effective post-workout. While there are plenty more performance-enhancing tips and tricks I could delve into, the takeaway message is this. By including just a few of the simple pieces of advice you've discovered in the past 2 Get Fit Guy episodes, you can experience a bigger boost in performance than you'd get by just, say, training hard. And a big thanks to Alex Hutchinson and Runner's World for the original article that inspired me to write this 2-part series. Now, if you have more questions about the fitness advice that gets you the most bang for your buck, then leave your thoughts over at facebook.com/getfitguy. And until next time, I'm Ben Greenfield, the Get Fit Guy, asking you, what are you waiting for? Go get fit.